Well, hello and happy Friday, everyone. Back with you after a hiatus for another Friday Facebook Live with Summit Racing. Brian and Dave with you. And we have a special guest, much anticipated, Matt Happel from Sloppy Mechanics. Matt, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Great. Thanks.
I like my face on the thumbnail. It looks good.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I picked that out myself. Thanks for making the time.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
So how's everything been going for you in these very, very strange times?
Yes, I'd say it's going really good. I'm sharing this link out here quick.
Okay. Yeah, while he's doing that, I should mention a couple things. Back into racing this weekend.
Right.
Summer Racing Team Summit out in Indianapolis. So we're looking forward to some of that normalcy, getting back in.
Yeah.
Of course, we shared Greg's new paint scheme yesterday. It looks fantastic.
Greg Anderson, Pro Stock.
Yep, absolutely. So looking forward to sort of a little bit of normalcy back again. So
I was cruising into work here today, and it was pretty cool. You know, we've got the big retail stores in 4 locations, and we had just a ton of customers out there. A lot of our employees returning, so it feels good. Definitely getting, it feels like we're getting back to normal. We're people just dealing with stuff better anyway.
Right. So Matt, again, thanks for the time. We had quite an influx of questions and comments leading up to this. So definitely a lot of interest in what you've been doing. I guess, first of all, tell me a little bit about just how you got into what you're doing, the wiki page, videos, everything. How did you get into this, and did you ever see it kind of becoming what it is?
It is interesting because I guess I was never into cars really at all. So this is just something I did for fun. When I started getting into cars, it was actually to take like a mental break from IT. So I do computers for a living, IT, and it was my hobby, and I made it my job, and it ruined it for me. A lot of people can probably associate with that with cars, where if they're a mechanic and they work on cars, it's difficult for them to come home from fixing awful vehicles all day and then take some time to fix build a car. So I made cars like a fun hobby, and then as I got into cars, it was mostly like a big voodoo magic thing where no one shared any information. And the more I got into that, and I would say that like I do very well in like a break fix scenario. So like I can look at something and be like, I want a result, and I can push towards it and see what happens and be like, that was wrong or that was good, and then move on. And then I slowly realized more and more that nobody would help anybody. And then second, if someone had knowledge and they would say that it was good, I would realize that it was actually bad, and people don't take that very nicely either.
Right.
So over a time, I'm like, why don't people share this info? And part of me is like, well, maybe it's because they're wrong and they don't want to be seen as wrong.
Right.
That's part of it. And then the other part is like they earned it and they spent their money, and that's okay too. But I realized that there was just like a giant void in information share. And in my opinion, everybody learns if everybody shares. So even if you give someone, and you can see that through the videos and the Sloppy Facebook page, you can give someone absolute sheet documentation on how to do something. It doesn't mean they can complete it or make the vehicle work. So in my opinion, like even on high-end racing, there's crazy secrets that people know. And even if you told somebody how to make a car go 370 or whatever, if you have a top fuel car and you told somebody how to operate the top fuel car, it doesn't mean that it's going to go any faster than a completely stock Honda Civic from 1995.
Right.
So it's all with the team and how they use it. But so the secretism really bothered me. So I just started. We started doing Sloppy Mechanics for fun. It was a joke, essentially. Before Cash for Clunkers, we would get we just liked big cars, so we would get like $150 old Ford, drive it in the field and hit things with it and just be idiots. Right. And then we would scrap it for like $300. So we'd make $150 being idiots with a large vehicle. And then it evolved into like, what's cheap to make more power with this giant car while we're being idiots, nitrous oxide. So nitrous then was cheap also. So we would put like 3 bottles through a car, ruining it, and then scrap it and make money. Like not like we were millionaires, but you'd make enough money to buy another car or two. Like,
the next project, right?
and after a while, we started making power reliably. Like we figured out ways to simply make reliable extra horsepower, and then it just started to snowball. And at some point, I told Kyle from 1320 Video this the other day. I saw the Parrish, the guy's name was, and he's a drag competitor, and he built that Fairmont, and it just hit me like I could do that. That's probably not that hard to figure out. So I essentially copied that car. We got into turbo LS stuff, and then we slowly. We broke a turbo LS car at like 300 horsepower. So that it's always funny. You go back to back in the day, people are like, you can't put a supercharger on an LS1 Camaro; it'll blow up on 3 pounds of boost. Like people would throw out arbitrary stuff, right? So why does it break at 3 pounds? Why is the limit 3 pounds? And then all of that stuff starts snowballing in your head, and we eventually developed some combinations that worked well for us, and I would share it, and people would take it and run with it, and they could do well too. So started developing like the wiki page and some other stuff, and just giving all of it away. And then Sloppy Mechanics, like the YouTube, it went from us just being idiots with cars to showing people how to duplicate a result to to where it is now.
Right. That's a pretty cool part. Our mission is really the same between you and Summit, just educating the customer, trying to help them along their path towards speed or toward, really whatever you're into. We got, rock crawlers, we got off-roaders, we got drag racers, road racers, the whole gamut. And it's like, just give them what they need, just that steady recipe, that steady progression. And it never stops. Nobody's ever satisfied with this thing. And you were bringing up something earlier about why don't people share this? I think everybody's always a little disappointed with their results because they know I'm going to just go that extra tenth, and then once I'm there, I can share this to the world. And you always get to that next tenth. My car, I was just hoping to break into the, the tens with it, and now it went 1056 right out of the gate, and I'm like, oh, I can go nines with this thing. It's within reach. Yeah. So we're just never finished, is what it is. But one of the cool things is, you start off with the junkyard parts, pulling 5.3s out of the wrecking yard, gap in the rings, and, reusing bolts and stuff like that, and it works. And, really with, some of the industry partners out there, like we carry a lot of the VS turbos, and it's like, well, people are just going from 500 to 1,000. We're just going to go ahead and, skip over, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000, whatever the number is. So, we're here for parts. We've got, really what people need, just as they want to get to the next step with it.
Yeah. Wanted to just jump in real quick. We had some technical issues from the outset. We lost some of the questions that were posed. So we want to encourage some of our viewers to repost their questions. If they have them. If you haven't posted them already, feel free to post them throughout the broadcast here. But Matt, what stoked your passion for what you do and just cars in general? How did you get into the hobby?
It's really tough to say. Like I just started messing with vehicles, like I said, as like a break from IT stuff, and I guess it's just being able to like produce a result out of something like that, or see something where people have difficulty with it and make it cheap and available, or just demystify it. A lot of what I like to do, I'm super skeptical, sarcastic person. So when someone says something, I'm like, well, I don't necessarily know if I believe what you're saying.
Right.
So when someone's like, well, you can't do that with a car, or you can't do that with this, or that won't work. And I'm like, well, why doesn't it work? And I usually say to people, if you can't explain to someone why, or if you can't teach someone how to do it, or explain to, like, a lot of people learn different ways. So if you can't explain something 3 different ways, so 3 different people understand it, you don't understand it. And I do a lot of finger pointing at times. I can definitely be weird, and I have a weird attitude, but I think it produces a good result a lot of times.
Right.
So whenever I'm like, well, why doesn't that turbo work? And people are like, it's just not the right size. And I'm like, well, why isn't it the right size? I want to know why. It's not that I'm trying to vilify you, and it's not that I'm trying to say that you don't know what you're doing. I mean, we may arrive at you don't know what you're doing,
Right.
but I want to know why so I can learn. And I feel like a lot of times that's why I push that stuff out of people is I'm like, well, why does that happen? And I might sound like I'm the jerk expert. I'm not. I would love to learn something I might not know. That's my drive, I would say, is just learning what I don't know.
Right. It's a weird thing because, we talk about experience, but experience isn't always about winning and having things actually work. Failure is a huge part of it. And then once you figure out why something broke, then you can fix that and move on to the next thing that's going to break and the next thing that's going to break. But you just continuous improvement. So that's a pretty good thing. We got a ton of comments coming through here. So one of the things about these live streams is, we're over here in Ohio. Matt's over in PA, Pennsylvania. I want to talk about that here in a bit too. We'd encourage, all you folks to jump on, just tell us your name and where you're from. We got people from all over the world here. So that's pretty cool seeing that part of it. So one of the things that always interests me about, we've got racers, we've got vendors and all that stuff. And you always see that these folks, you can really start up anywhere in the world, So you're over in PA and a lot of people will be like, oh, I got to move here, I got to move there to go do this stuff. And it's like, nope, I live here. We're just going to go ahead and get started. And then you create your own little hub. You didn't have to go off and find it. You just created it right where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that what you just said about failure is always an option. I feel like that's something Adam Savage would say, but I feel like that's a big thing that I like to push on people who watch Sloppy too. That's why I like to show when stuff doesn't go right, and I like to leave it open-ended. I'm like, well, I broke this, so why do you think it broke?
Right.
Because if we just accepted that you needed a $50,000 engine to make 800 horsepower, none of us would be where we are with this turbo LS stuff. It happens frequently where I'll break something at like 500 horsepower and immediately people are in the comments. I would say it's not so much anymore. There's a lot of people that have been along for a long ride through Sloppy. So there'll be new people that are like, so why don't you just build the engine?
Right.
And I'm like, I don't think you're getting it, because every year we find a way to make 100 extra horsepower to the tire every single year safely. So I'm like, well, how long can this business model project itself? And it's still going. It's crazy. It is interesting how you can and it gets cheaper every year too.
Right.
And then what's also crazy too is like I talked about it on Sloppy not that long ago, where people are like, well, all Sloppy is cheap China parts. And I'm like, well, that's not all of it. And miraculously, like, we are coming full circle through using cheap stuff and finding what works and what doesn't. We are bringing a lot of stuff back to American manufacturing, or through testing something, we find somebody that's like, I can build this here now cheaper and ship it. I live in Georgia. I can make it for you. I can ship it to you. And then what happens is everybody that liked the cheap part through Sloppy can now get in touch with this guy. And now this guy has a customer base and a job and more stuff to sell. And so it's a little bit of both, obviously.
Right. Well, we feel the same way about the vendors. You put a lot of people on the map. You can talk about, these things that you just know that work. Byron over at VS Racing, we brought him on this last year, and it's because he makes really good stuff and he outstanding customer service. It's like anytime, people at Summit, like, hey, can you carry this? We like your service. We like your shipping and all that business. Obviously the pricing's good, but you put a lot of people on the map. I can think about snake eater injectors. And it's just, your experience through finding these folks and, just these relationships you built. So tell us, like, when was it, about 10 years ago that Sloppy got started, or, how's that progression been?
Oh, well, that's what I said. Like, I started it and I opened the YouTube account in 2006.
Right.
And that was when we realized that people might want to see some dumb stuff that we were doing. And that was like the nitrous rental cars and stuff like that. So, and that's literally how it started, is like, watch us be idiots, like not unfamiliar with Jackass or something like that. Just
Right.
watch us be stupid. And then, like I said, it totally evolved into we're accidentally making horsepower, and now we're accidentally reliable, and now a lot of stuff has come to fruition because of that.
Right.
And most notably, like like you guys, like Summit or other brands, or like you brought up Snake Eater, which is funny because he contacted me out of the blue, and he was like, I've heard you say in your videos there's super expensive injectors and super cheap injectors. And he's like, you constantly bring up I'll beat the drum on people, and I'll be like, why does no one make an injector in the middle?
Right.
There's $2,000 ones and $200 ones, and for a lot of people that's not a good fit. So if we could just get a quality middle sized, because now E85 and everything else, like, it's funny, it's easy to make horsepower, it's just putting the fuel in the damn engine and stuff.
Right.
Now. So he actually developed like the whole company. He's like, I don't want to send you a bad product and have you roast me, but I would like to work with you.
Right.
And have you test things until, he's like, it might not be good. It might not be good for 6 months. It might not be good for a year, but what I'd like to eventually get into is something that is good that people can buy.
Right.
So, and then, that's where he is now. So,
well, that's exactly what we've done with the Pro LS stuff too. It's like, it's really, really good. American made. As much as we can do it here in the States, we do it. But it doesn't have to be priced like crazy. I mean, just because the parts may be the best, and they might, doesn't mean you have to price them out there at the very top level either. We've had some comments here about the democratization of speed, and it's not just the parts. It's also, you're teaching people like, hey, you may not know how to weld. Just go get a welder. Just go get started. So even some of the fabrication skills, it's like, I may not be, really proud of my welds, but you've kind of shown people like, what does it matter? You're going out there and you're going to go race with it. You're going to get better at welding, but you just got to get out there and do it.
yeah, like I say something similar to David Freiberger says the same thing. A running engine or a moving vehicle is better than a not moving vehicle. And I think people get caught up with they have to have a pro mod immediately. No, like if it moves and drives and pulls itself in and out of a garage or to your friend's house, adding ancillary power adders later is very easy. Once the vehicle is moving and has brakes and everything else, it's extremely easy to add that stuff later. And same thing, yeah. I'm used to like I would say Sloppy has been built under fire the whole time because I would do dumb things and people would be like, why are you doing that? I'm like, well, why not? Why be so mad about something I'm doing that may or may not work? It's not your money or your time, and it's not your responsibility to watch any of it. So, and that's where I'm like, I say to people all the time, I'm not a welder, I'm not a professional, but this, what I do works. And you don't have to be like ashamed because your hot side looks ugly. If it makes turbo noises and you want to make turbo noises, you won. And I would say that that's like a familiar thing where I brought out like the don't BS me combo, because I stress to people, when you start a build, you should have a goal, because meeting a goal will make you satisfied in your build. You'll feel accomplishment, right? So I'm familiar with doing IT work. A lot of times you can pour 40 hours into something and have nothing to show for it at all. It's digital and it can get, no one will ever see it. It gets thrown out, whatever. At least when you're building a house, you see a house at the end of the day. There's something to show for that. So I say all the time, like, you have to have a goal. And then people get stressed out because they're like, I don't know how fast I want to go. What if I'm scared to go that fast? Or I don't think I have the money to go fast. How am I going to impress people by going fast? And I'm like, how about you do burnouts with your kids and get ice cream? Like people say this all the time because I say it, but I'm like, that's a real goal. There's real value in, I'm like, why does anyone build cars? Like I will do burnouts or do, destroy things with your vehicle or whatever.
Right.
That's a valid goal. You don't have to have 600 horsepower. You don't have to have 1,000. Doing burnouts and eating ice cream with your arm on a bench seat, one-handing a 1,000-foot burnout is a valid goal. You can do that. You don't have to be ashamed. It's cool. I think it's cool.
Yeah. No, it's funny. So you've taught a lot of people that don't get caught up in the number. It's 650 at the wheels can be truly scary. And people driving these cars on the street. And you brought up something else too about keeping these cars running. I myself, I've had projects that I just started taking things apart, and it just basically turned into a huge pile of parts, and the thing never went together again.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in my life, I learned okay, I just need to try to concentrate. What can I do in one weekend in my garage? It's I can do a differential or this cam swap or, whatever I do, just trying to keep it simple. And that steady progression is really the only thing you need. And then that's another cool thing about Boost. It's well, just give yourself 3 more pounds, get used to it. And when you're used to it, give yourself 3 more pounds. And then you find something breaks, well, you fix that. And then it's well, now I just need more traction. So you need more tire. Boost is a pretty cool thing, that you're not ever quite finished with it. And you can learn to control a top fuel dragster. You brought it up earlier about that top fuel dragster. It's it'd scare me, to hop in one of those things and try to go 4s, right out of the gate. But you know what? I can go 10s, 950s, 9s, and I will get there. It's just a matter of getting used to it.
Yeah. He had mentioned earlier, Brian, a little bit about the Pro LS cams. We did have a question from a customer. Just wanted to know a little bit more about them. We've done a little bit of work back and forth between the two of us, collaboration. What's your thoughts on the Pro LS cams that you've used so far? And just as an open-ended question from a customer here.
Oh, they've worked fantastic, and I have they came out. I would say they came out right around a year ago. Would you guys say?
Yeah.
So we were in the middle of some builds where I was using my Elgin. I say but it's literally a cam that that's a story for another day where we just funneled into those, and then people would buy them out of existence. There's the whole, we call it the sloppy effect, right? So it's funny to me that I have that kind of market control. It's very odd, but it's not too unfamiliar from ridiculous scenes from the Fast and Furious where they're whatever Dom has the kids buy, that's
Right.
It's funny, but that's where we are. But they work great, and I would say that more so the turbo is the limiting factor than the camshaft.
Right.
So what's nice is you guys have availability on the scale of cams, and one of a recent build, my buddy Brett with the 3rd gen used the Summit cam, and he was nervous he had a 406 carbureted engine in that car. He's had it since high school. And he was nervous to go turbo LS because he's I'm sure in his mind, he's Matt, we'll just rifle parts or things. And he's done so many combos. I don't know if I'll be happy when I'm done with this. So he pick and chose. And I would say that he probably developed the best sloppy combo to date economically.
Right.
And that's with a Summit cam and just the Trailblazer plastic intake and a lot of stuff where people are that's not really, you need a big shiny intake, and everything else. And he just took a lot of simple things and maybe he added 10% on top of all of those with thought and quality product and everything else. And he has the best results to date out of one of those combinations. So
that's a tremendous combination. When you guys posted up your dyno numbers, I'm that's getting it. Maven, Austin down there in Texas, he's the same way. He's just a random post on LS1 Tech. He's what do I put in this? What cam do I put in this thing? Because he's had 50 228 Texas speed cams and stuff. And I'm why don't you try out this relatively small, some 8715 cam. It's 222 at 50. And he does it, and he makes tremendous power with this thing. And it's really just the combination. Everything was just absolutely right with it. Idled surprisingly well, not to us, but to the market. So much that we ended up calling it the Ghost Cam. That was his name for it. So we have these industry partners and racers that we just love dealing with, and creating these parts. And I think the other part of it is, back in the day, 5.3s weren't a thing. It's like, no, you had to have a 6-liter, and then people were like, nope, you're actually going faster with 5.3s. And then people are going faster with 5.3s, and everybody knows that, no, you need a 5.3. And then it's like, nope, 4.8s are out there too for $200-$300. Let me just go get one of those. And so 4.8s are what you use with 8F8. And can you tell us a little bit about, how you decided that, okay, I'm going to buy this car, I want to go this fast for this amount of money?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's funny to do more with less, do more with less money, do more with less engine, do more with less replacement parts. Mm-hmm. So that carries into the 4.8. And I had a car. It's funny. It's this car right here, the white Fairmont, Fairmont 5, I called it. Yeah. That was originally going to be 8s for 8. And then I had some funny issues with the car. So whenever I deem something like straight race, or if I tell people, I just like to do stuff for fun and then go for the goal. So I feel like if I ever point at something and I'm like, this is going to be the car that does it, it fights me. I'm sure a lot of people can appreciate that. So that's why I like to try to keep it fun, because I'm like, as soon as you try to do that, sometimes all it's going to do is fight you the whole way. So
good.
What I did with that, so I knew I could do it then. So after a while of building up the combination to make a lot of power, building some to make economical power, and sharing a bunch of combinations, I get a lot of flack every now and then where people are like, why don't you just build a fast car? Like, if you have such a big mouth, why don't you build a car that's fast and cheap and show us how to do it?
Right.
If you're so transparent and they get a little weird. And I'm like, well,
weird.
It would be pretty easy to do a car in the 8-second range, in the $8,000 range. There's probably 20 scenarios in my head that I can just line up where that's possible. And I was like, people are really going to hate this, because I have a lot of friends who are big into drag racing. I understand drag racing. I've been to the track. People throw astronomical money at these things, and sometimes they don't go that fast, and that's not a huge deal, but their perception gets warped where they're like, well, you need X amount of dollars to go this fast. Right. Absolutely. Because they're like, well, it cost me $50,000 in 5 years to go 890. So that's a struggle, and people have to struggle. Not entirely. So I'm like, well, I'll just take some of what I know and I'll buy so be cost effective. So I looked at rollers. Fox body Mustangs obviously are the easiest thing in the world to go fast. They're set up from the factory to go fast with small tweaks.
Yep.
And I just looked at a chassis that would be the cheapest. Right now, new Edges are pretty popular, and older Foxes, like Notches, extremely expensive, very desirable. They go up and down. Right. Nobody cares about SN95s. Nobody cares about them at all. So just like Fairmonts, I'm like, I like Fairmonts because they're ugly old Fords and they're $400.
Right.
And I whether or not I'm to blame for blowing up the price on those, but now it's like $3,000 for a stock Fairmont. It's atrocious. It makes no sense. It's a Coke can with wheels and a Ford badge on it. So why is it $3,000? Some jerk on the internet made them cost that much, probably. Right. But we looked around, and my buddy Mark and I, he had a car that he built, and I helped tune and everything else relatively cheap that went 7s. Like, we didn't even, it was kind of like, let's see how fast it goes. And we push it into the 7s, and we're like, oh, well, that's faster than we thought it would go. So he and I were like, we should do another car. He has a fairly expensive race car and a street car and some other stuff. And he's like, we should just do something fun, you and I. And I'm like, let's build the 8s for 8. Let's do that. So I announced that. And then obviously we looked up like cheap roller SN95s, and we ended up getting that car. It did not look like much. It had Jeep wheels on it because it was sitting in a guy's shop for like 7 years.
Right.
And the guy had to take the calipers off of it to put the Jeep wheels on it to make it a roller. So it didn't even have brakes, but it came with an insane amount of parts. And I feel like, again, that's why I beat the drum and I preach to people, get the car moving and rolling, and your inspiration stays with it. the difficulty level drops tremendously when you're not tackling a giant project. So obviously someone spent a ton of money on suspension and everything else, which I know that's what people do. They spend a whole bunch of money on a large project, they get a quarter of the way through and they got to drop it.
Right.
So I'm like, we just got to find a roller where someone spent a bunch of money on a chassis and then couldn't afford a $40,000 Ford engine and whatever else. So
Right.
we found one for $1,900. It was like just an hour south of Mark, and he went and picked it up, and it was really rough. And we're like laughing at how rough it is, but it even has fuel lines in it. It has battery lines in it. It has complete tubular front end, adjustable coilovers, bump steer kit, welded tube differential. It has literally everything. It even had someone put inboard shock mounts on it, relocated the shocks. So it could be, someone was like moments away from mini tubbing it, but luckily for us, they never cut the wheel tubs out because they probably were like, well, I can't do the replacement tub right now.
Right.
So we're like, oh, cool. No one cut the stupid wheel wells out. So now there's no money involved in that. And then I'm like, I'll get a $200 4.8. I'll get a cheap mid-frame turbo that can be, so then we designed the car to be easily upgraded too. But grand scheme of things, for in the $8,000 range, it went 8s its first day out. We didn't have difficulty. And then, I mean, through that project, I had some problems, and people immediately, I mean, that generated a lot of hate, and I knew that the car would. And I even said to my wife when we started it, this is going to make a lot of people really mad because of the price point,
Right.
period. There are people that spent the money and put the time in, and it was really difficult for them, and they're going to be mad. So anytime I had any issue, and I like to show when I have issues, and I'd be like, hey, something funny happened. And in the last 15 years, I really haven't had one piston turn to dust. It's just kind of odd, especially for like the horsepower range I was in.
Right.
And so we had some issues with that. And then I never had a timing chain break ever. And the one day, like, we got the thing ready to go, I put it on the dyno, and like in 2 hits at low power, it snapped the timing chain clean off. Yeah, it's one of those things where we deemed it a race car and we were going to show everybody how to do it. So it was kind of slapping us in the face.
And that was something you had those repeated failures in the 1 or 2 cylinders, and that ended up being coils, or what was the deal with that?
Yeah, it's a combination of a long dwell time and that particular coil design. I think like there's probably 10 or 12 different coil designs from GM, and that's the only one, that D585 with the heat sink. And
Right.
It's probably an engineering thing that was probably a really great idea. And then in practice, you're like, oh, this wasn't a great idea. But they designed the coil to physically protect itself. If it overcharged, it would automatically fire to get rid of the charge so it wouldn't heat up or melt itself.
Right.
But therein lies an issue, is that it's firing whenever it wants to.
Right.
So that could be 40 degrees of advance or 40 degrees of retard. Obviously, one of those is really awful for a glass piston stock bottom end car. So that's what I believe was happening because I changed. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and you shared that with the world too. You know, that's something where you were going really fast with it. You were very scientific about how you discovered that problem, and then you fixed it and got through it, and just did it all over again.
Yeah. So we weren't sure particularly. I mean, I swapped coils on it, and it never happened again. I
Right.
put different coil packs on, and I did. And people are like, why don't you just take it easy? And I'm like, no. They're like, why don't you just settle into a power amount and go up? And I'm like, I'm just going to smash it with full power, because that shouldn't just explode, number one, like that. It's very odd. Literally turn it to dust. There's nothing left. Normally you bend it or break something or whatever.
Right.
And I'm like, at 700, the car made a max of 750 rear wheel. So there's another thing. It's neat to show people. I mean, what's funny is Kyle Loftus 1320 video, pretty much I saw that stuff and I'm like, this stuff's cool. I can do this too. So he pretty much inspired Sloppy Mechanics in its own way. I remember telling him that, and he was like, this is an odd full circle thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
But what I also dislike about that is, and it's not entirely his fault, we've gone back and forth about it. Like I said, I have my weird mannerisms on calling people out. And I'm like, why in all your videos does everyone make 1900 horsepower and go 9s?
Right.
And it just aggravates me because it's one of those things where it's regurgitated improper car knowledge.
Right.
So when I built 8s for 8, and we even did a live stream for like an hour and a half when we threw it on the dyno the one time, and we pushed up a little bit over 700, and then the turbo was completely done from 18 pounds to 20 some pounds. It made 50 extra horsepower, which is awful, but it easily made 700-ish rear wheel. And people immediately in the comments were like, 700's nowhere near enough to go 8s. You guys, this is a failure already, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, 7 and change is completely acceptable to go 8s. It'll go over 150 miles an hour. And the one guy's like, this is a joke. You're a moron. You don't even need a chute. It'll never go anywhere near 150. It went 153.
Right.
And I knew it would, simply because of using a chassis dyno and trusting it. It produces a number. I know a vehicle weight. I know a mile an hour. It's math.
Right.
And it's not voodoo magic. And that's what I always like to tell people. It's math. Obviously, with 700 rear wheel, we need a 60-foot well. We can't just rely on screaming out the back end.
Right.
So I'm like, we just have the 60-foot well. And the car did like 135-foot 1-2 gear wheelie and still went 8s. And I'm like, what other people don't realize is, I'm like, that car probably could have gone 840 that day if we had $10 in Home Depot suspension limiting chains bolted to the front end.
Right.
And they're like, nope, that's a lie too. And I'm like, 8s is a lie. 150 miles an hour is a lie. All the parts are a lie. The fact that I reused all the parts live on camera and used an impact gun, that's also fabricated. This is pretty expensive movie production just to do this for fun.
Right.
Yeah.
You've been monitoring some of the questions in here. We've got a ton of them.
Well, yeah, we can. I mean, I will soapbox on. You guys can stop me and interrupt me anytime.
Well, going back to the Fairmont and everything, somebody wanted to know what's the next sort of unconventional build maybe that's on your radar, or maybe you're thinking about, or maybe unbeknownst to everybody else, you've already got in the works.
Oh, okay. I think about weird stuff all the time. And one thing I've never done, which someone recently did, and I posted his video yesterday, is he took like an old box Accord, like a 91 Accord or a hatchback similar, and he LS rear wheel drive V8 swapped the whole thing. I've never taken like a front wheel drive car and made it rear wheel drive. So I've always thought one of my wife's first cars was a Ford Escort, like the boxy 90-some Escort. And I'm like, it'd be so cool to make one of those V8 rear-wheel drive.
1990.
Yeah, like something ugly like that. And ugly old Fords I like. So I'm all on board for that. Right. And the other thing I've thought about making rear-wheel drive that never was there's a ton of those Jelly Bean mid-90s Dodge Caravans.
Right.
And I'm like, man, it'd be so cool. You ever see the picture of the Volkswagen bus where the guy slides the door open and it has like a blown big block in the back?
Yeah.
I'm like, it'd be so cool to get one of those Jelly Bean, crappy 90-some Dodge Caravans, cut the whole back out, hang an Explorer rear end. Like, I'd love to learn more about how to do like a proper suspension geometry, like build a ladder bar or my own 4-link or similar. And put that in the back of a minivan and build like the wall. And it'd be even funnier if I kept I talked about it with some friends. They're like, you should keep the V6 in the front and show up at the track, like drive in, valve stem seals, smoking, everything. And then open the sliding door and lock it and then do your burnout with the rear wheels and
just
race.
Put 6 in neutral, rev them up.
Yeah, like it'd be dumb to do both. I think it'd be funny to do both, but I think it'd be ultimately easier to put like the fuel tank in under the hood. It'd be funny to go to the gas station, open the hood of a 95 Caravan. Totally normal for a lot of people to see someone working on a Caravan at a gas station, but then like just dump gasoline in the engine bay. So that would be funny too. Just the mental imagery of that is hilarious to me. So
I like it. So talking about haters and all that stuff, you were putting LS engines in Fords long before it was popular. And now everybody does it. And everybody's just like, well, that's just how you go fast. But when you first started doing that, not a lot of people had done that at that point.
Oh, yeah. I would say that's another thing I like to show people is brand loyalty will hold you back. And it's, I don't know why people are so. I guess it's okay. I've never been into sports, so I don't understand like the whole like this is my team, and if they suck, I'm just gonna stay with them. Like
Right.
if your car, I tell people too, like if they're working on a car and it's always a struggle, I'm like, get rid of the car. Throw away your emotional attachment to this vehicle. It's like a abusive relationship. Just get out of it.
That's nice.
Just leave it behind. Get rid of your S10, please, and then just buy a Colorado. It's easier. Like, don't complain about something that's difficult to work with and then continue to work with it difficult. So just get rid of it and start over. So
Makes sense.
Anything on the Coyote side that you're looking into? Or?
Oh, I would love to do Coyote stuff. It's just like my brain is hardwired for this cost effectiveness.
Yeah.
So that's why it's neat that like you guys jump in and you give me expensive parts to play with, and Holly and a bunch of other people throughout the years like have shown me that like, and I like showing that to Sloppy too. It's not that people are stuck on like Sloppy Mechanics is all about building junk and being proud of junk. I'm like, it's more of some of the people do that, and that's why I don't like that. But what can I do about it? The other part is helping people find value in certain things, right? So there's some stuff I do, and there's some stuff that other people do, and it just as a practice, like. And what I like to find is what is valuable. And years ago, I found there's extreme value in torque converters. So I used to think it was just a mystery item. And a lot of people, it's a mystery item.
Right.
And you can have a car that makes considerable power and goes nowhere. And it's going into that. And without the facts, that's why I like to do, I feel like, not to be like egomaniac, but I feel like I'm one of the first people to show people, I'll show you my results. And that's what people do that all the time. But I will show complete like data log, dyno runs, just what I have. And it might not be perfect, but it's what I have, and it's how I gauge stuff. So I can say to people like, there's looking at the mile an hour, what's obvious for people like me and other people that have used a chassis dyno. So if you have 500 horsepower and it goes to 160 miles an hour, and you make 700 horsepower and it goes to 130 miles an hour, and you make 900 horsepower and it drops to 100 miles an hour, and you lift it at 7,000 RPM each time, that's all torque converter loss.
Right.
That's why I post a lot of my Turbo LS dyno charts by mile an hour, so people can see. If you're looking at a car that you guys probably know, and a bunch of people have learned this over the years from watching what I post up, but I can put up a dyno plot for a car that goes to 6,000 and then draws like a funny squiggle. And people are like, well, that's an awful looking power chart. But if you show them a mile an hour chart where from 75 miles an hour to 175 miles an hour, the car put down 900 rear wheel.
Right.
That's obviously very desirable.
Right.
So it looks like shit because it makes such a small power band by an RPM chart. But it's because the converter shoved itself up to 6,500, and then it made all the mile an hour from 6,500 to 7,000. But it did it. So so it's important to like look at certain stuff like that. Everything else, I have gone off the rails so long, I don't remember what you asked me.
No, it's cool there. And speaking about the converter, those tires only know, what they're being fed. It's one of those things, you get, caught up on the horsepower and all that business, right. But the tires, what the tires see is really what gets the car down the track. So that's a pretty cool deal.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do get caught up on just power numbers and don't explore the other parts of the equation. We had a question about Terminator versus HP and kind of compare and contrast. Any thoughts on those?
Is it just, did they just ask like very simply like that, or are they
very simple, very broad question? Yeah.
I mean, it's a tough situation. Obviously, the Terminator is way better. There's many facets where it's way better. But if you have a vehicle that needs to pass emissions, you're kind of stuck. You can't just remove. If it's a swap, it's way better to do a Terminator. If it's not vehicle dependent, it's way better to do a Terminator. In my opinion, it looks like we're all just like super excited to use it and everything else, and it may even seem like unrealistic, but it is that easy to use. It is that incredible. And there's a bunch of people I know that have gone over to it after watching my videos, and they've personally used HB tuners, and they've personally used a lot of stuff. And we call it Game Boy tuning, where you just use the handheld and you thumb out a Tetris game and the car starts.
Right.
And you're like it even amazes me after all of my experience and know-how to just Game Boy the car and it starts and runs. And I would say that that's 99% of the difficulty with people once they have a completed project. It's disheartening to see like they can't get it to run. And they're like, why won't it run? And there's so many facets of, I could make a video of a pie chart, like of a stock computer has a certain operating system, and then it has certain capabilities, and then it can do certain transmissions, and then it can see a certain size injector. And then you're so limited in many ways that you don't know until you dive in. And then you're like, I spent $400 in licensing. I have these ECUs and none of them can do flex fuel.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, and then you get stuck. And then you're like, well, I bought an LS2 swap and a 6-speed from a GTO because that's a good swap. All the mechanical stuff is good. But I got stuck with the E40 ECU, and I didn't know how bad they were until I licensed it. Couldn't put a larger than a 60-pound injector in. Couldn't put larger than a 2-bar map in it. I want to run 3-bar. I want to run snake eaters. The entire physical architecture and operating system on this ECU is completely limiting. So now I have to learn how to scale it. And whenever I ask people, I just had someone interrupt me, and he purposely said, I'm going to interrupt you. Anyway. So like you get stuck with that, and then you ask on a forum, hey, I have an E40, and everyone goes, oh God, you have an E40. Like you just have an uphill battle on ice with your bare feet. Right. And you're like, I thought I bought a good thing. Like it's disappointing. So what's cool is the people don't really understand, I think, how incredible a product like the Terminator is. And when they brought me on board, like secretly told me about it months before release, I'm like, well, how much is this going to cost? Because this is pretty, if it can do this, that's pretty fantastic. But this is supposed to be a budget.
The reach of a lot of people, but when it's $1,000, it's a phenomenal deal.
Yeah. I'm like, if you're calling me and you want me to be a part of it and or promote or test it, and you're saying it's going to be affordable, please tell me what affordable is to Holly that owns 65 companies. What exactly is affordable? And he was like, well, it's going to be $9.99. And I'm like, that's what's included for that? So like my brain stopped, and I'm like, wait, what do you get? That's a good price, but what do you get? And he's like, wiring harness, ECU, wideband, ECU, and I'm like, and a dash, and the dash has the sniper style wizard.
Right.
And I'm like, all of that for $9.99, that's insane to me. I'm like, how can you even afford to produce that product?
Yeah.
And then, like in the beginning, I would say right when that dropped, I would say some people were like, this is kind of a sellout. And I'm like, honestly, I like using the most effective product for my money. And there's nothing that comes close to this. They basically downscaled like all of their more expensive stuff that was worth the money anyway, but people always didn't maybe want to spend. And they downsized the price and everything and really left all the functionality there. And I'm like, I don't know how you didn't have to, but you did.
It's really cool that they did that. And it's fun being in the manufacturing business because, I like making parts. That's what I do here at Summit Racing is, create parts, but it's cool for one company to race against another company. Yes. And I've brought it up in previous live streams that, we'd be working on something, for months and months and months, and then we'd spring it on our competitors, at SEMA or PRI, and then it was like, then they'd have to go back to the drawing board. And it was that constant, what can you offer people more and more and more in terms of value each year? And, we'd get to this point where it's like, what do we do next? But you always found something to do next. It never stops. And you just have to sometimes, I think about it all the time. Like, okay, what am I going to do in a month? But then I'm going to have an idea tomorrow. And then we're just going to go ahead and do it. We've got this tremendous team of people here that can, from concept to actually having it out there on the shelves, and the guys out here in shipping that, can help get it out the door to people. But, racing companies can be a thing too. So people that, are in this industry, it's just never stops.
Yep. Another question popped in. In your 2500 project, how did you integrate the Terminator with the factory ECU? What inputs did you need to keep the factory ECU?
Oh, well, that's like a funny subject. People ask about it, and I'm nervous to tell people what I did because I did what I don't think anybody should do. And just to trigger people, I took the intake off, and there was all the stock wiring, and there's that, it's like the size of your wrist above the intake past the alternator.
Right.
And I cut it with bolt cutters. I just cut it, and I posted a picture of it like completely destroyed. And I was like, because I was nervous to integrate it. So my solution for hitting like a mental lockup on that project was to just cut it and deal with it. So I struggled to get started on what I wanted to do with it. So I knew I could figure it out if I just cut it and forced myself. And I wouldn't recommend people just cut their harness out like that. There are people, one or two people I know, I think are developing like a P01 and P59, which is like that 99 to 06 era Silverados and stuff like that. They're going to develop like a slim down harness, and then you can run both. And I would say your level of integration depends on what you're going to do. So it's like a weird open-ended question. It's hard for me to answer some questions, and that's one of them. I would say it depends on like your goals and what you want to do. You could leave all the stock stuff in. So say you have a cable throttle stock ECU Silverado, and you want to do some Terminator integration. So what do you want to take over? Do you just want to take over the engine? Then just take over the engine and only unplug what the Terminator is plugging into. And then very easily I just split the crank position signal. I actually took an extra piece of wiring harness. I think it's a map sensor extension, but it has the teeth in it. And I just cut the teeth so I could plug the 3-wire crank position sensor into it. And it was left over from War Performance. And I made a splitter for the crank signal. So then I plugged that into the stock computer. So then the stock computer can see when the car's running. It can produce a tach signal. It can relay all the stuff to the dash that already exists that I didn't cut out. And all of that's going on. And then what I did was I used the stock ECU to control the fans, because I was going to use the stock ECU to do air conditioning and everything else. So what happens there is all that stuff's there. That's the whole funny thing with HB tuners and Holley, right? So utilizing both is the best case scenario, but having the knowledge to do both isn't always the easiest, and purchasing all the equipment. But that's what you're going to run into if you need an emissions controlled OBD2 pluggable late model truck, have your cake and eat it too kind of thing. So I took over drive-by-wire, because my truck was drive-by-wire. So the Holley's doing drive-by-wire, the Holley's doing the engine, and the Holley's doing the transmission. So I cut out all of the transmission stuff, and then I realized I put the truck in reverse, and the range selector is gone. I cut it out. So then it can't tell the BCM to turn on the reverse lights. Stuff like hindsight. So I just, like I said, I did a bad, and I just cut it right out. And then I have to deal with that. But what's cool is like the Holley can produce, you can say when the range selector is in -1, which means reverse, you can tell it to turn on an output, and it'll turn it on. You can wire it to the brake lights then,
right,
or similar. And then also what I did was I didn't have any of the transmission stuff like the vehicle speed and input shaft. I cut all that out. So I took an output from Holley as a speedometer output and wired it directly to the back of the dash for the speedometer input. So I did stuff like that, and then the rest of it's all open to use per se. So what's nice about having the stock computer is you can control fans and alleviate an output or two from the Holley. But so I hope that answers. I know it gets muddy and convoluted, but it's a difficult answer. So I like to try to cover all of those facets. So having a goal and a game plan, and I would say you can get your feet wet and just take over certain things. You don't have to go crazy right away.
Yeah. So we got a couple of interesting questions coming in here. One of it, and they kind of tie into each other. What's the benefit of using forged parts over stock? And then talk about the Summit engine build that's actually sitting right here behind us. We're doing something very similar with you as well. And like you've taken people from, 500 to 600 to 700 to 800. We're out at 1,000 right now, and we're doing it with fairly stock parts. You can do that. A lot of it's in the tune, and if you have a bad day there with the tune, it could be the octane, whatever it is. What we're doing is basically trying to add, not a fuse. It's one of these things that you can detonate and you're not going to break stuff. So we've got the pistons and the rods and the cranks. This particular engine, it's pretty trick. It's only meant to be basically 1,000 at the wheels. The parts are rated at about 1,200 at the wheels, and they'll easily do that, and they'll do it for a really long time too. So if you have a bad day, you're not going to destroy an engine. So that's a little bit about it. I guess the other thing is, we want to test this stuff and go out there and make this number and just see how long it lives. We're going to put this thing in a project engine, in a project car, and we're just going to go beat on it for years, and we're going to find out if it fails, why, and then we're just going to go ahead and keep moving on. What are some of the other questions you got?
Just around the cams, the sloppy stage 3, heavy run-ins. What else?
I'll try to do a real quick summary. We have done sloppy stage 3 and 2 comparisons in a lot of vehicles, and I would say that for the power they make, similar to like you say about people oversizing a turbo cam, they're like, well, I'm going to buy that stage 4 turbo cam because I have a turbo and I want all the power. And what they don't realize is for 500, 600 wheel, they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're pushing their power band to an unusable spot, blah, blah, blah. You won't really see the number. You spent the money. You have poor idle vacuum. You had to buy more expensive valve springs. And I know Brian and I have gone back and forth about having a crazy valve spring isn't always a great idea because it adds all that mechanical force to the valve and the rocker. And so if you don't need it, why are you doing it? And that's a lot of like what I like to preach too. But we have put the stage 3 on cars back to back and made absolutely no power gain. But I feel like that's because we don't have some crazy all-pro CNC'd cathedral port head and an intake that's over the roof line and stuff that's advantageous to utilize like such a large cam. So a lot of times putting in a larger cam really does nothing other than affect like your power brakes, your idle quality, give you some headaches if you have an automatic. A lot of people, I don't know why, love to do a stock torque converter in a giant cam anymore. I feel like that's the last year is guys with trucks want a gigantic cam and a stock converter in their 6L80E. And they're like, why does it push through my brakes? Why does it want to drive 40 miles an hour on its own? Well, it's because, bro, your idle is at 1,000 and your converter grabs at 750. And right. Someone more than likely explained all this to you 3 times and you did it anyway. And now you're upset because you didn't listen and you want to blame somebody else.
Yeah, so, we have a lot of 5.3 guys, and you're right. They want to go straight to stage 4. And it's like, nah, you're going to be pushing yourself out to 8,000 RPM with that cam with the 5.3, and that's well past where your valve train is good for. And if they want to go put $2,500 in their valve train, that's fine. But why do that when your intake manifold is tuned for this?
And then they have a truck intake, and you're like, okay, not
right.
Good either. Now you sound like a parts salesman, and they get mad because they're like, the guy says I have to buy all this stuff. Well, you bought a gigantic cam and you wanted to use it. So to get the best out of that, you have to spend all this extra money.
Yeah, put the stage 2 in it and on down the road. Richard Holdner just did that really fabulous test with his 4.8, where he ended up taking our basically our 218 truck cam, the 8720, and it made the same exact peak power as our stage 2, but it picked up considerable torque down there in the 3,000, 3,500 range. And that was the win. It's like, why kill yourself with this huge cam when this, the little guy did everything it did and more. And you had a similar 216 Elgin cam that you've used in the past as well on 4.8s.
Yeah, we call it the sloppy stage 1 unofficially. So, and that's what people all the time are like, I put a sloppy stage 2 in, I have a stock torque converter, my brakes suck. Sloppy stage 2 is awful idle vacuum. I would say that's a benefit for a Summit cam, has much better idle vacuum. Summit stage 2 versus sloppy stage 2. If you have sensitive power brake car that uses a manifold vacuum, Summit stage 2 is way better. It has substantially better vacuum at idle. The only thing why the sloppy stage 2 exists is because it's an off-shelf I found cheap. And the issue I found out was the 216, 220, the sloppy stage 1 makes the same power. And Holdener has said it, I have said it, but it doesn't chop. So people are like, I put a cam in my car, I wanted it to sound cool. It doesn't sound cool. So that's why that exists, is because, not because I think it's better, it's because I know people they'll say that that's fine. They'll be like, a 216 is fine. I'll put that in. I want more idle vacuum. And then they put it in. They're like, doesn't chop.
Turbo cams don't chop, and it's unfortunate. So we've got all of our cams, even if it doesn't matter if it's stage 1 through 4, they all have about 2 degrees of overlap, and we do that because we're trying to keep the basically the reversion down. It's kind of strange because stage 1, 2, and 3, they're all kind of conventional, slightly smaller intake, slightly bigger exhaust. To achieve that 2 degrees of overlap, actually stage 4 becomes a reverse split cam. It goes 237, 234, and people are like, that's straight out of the 1960s. And it's like, no, it's not. If you actually look at each one of the individual valve events, that's what we needed to do to hit, our exhaust opening here and our exhaust closing there, intake opening here and intake closing. So that's how we get, the reliability out of it, keep the reversion down. But yeah, you're right. A lot of people want the chop. And for that, actually, what works really well is some of our truck cams. So those cams, we've actually got fairly narrow lobe separation and quite a bit of advanced ground into them too. So we're opening that intake valve up, say 5 degrees before top dead center. That gives you the chop. At the same time, we've got that intake closing point backed up really well. So that's what's keeping all of our low and mid range. So that's what makes a truck cam. Is we try to give the people the sound that they're looking for, but at the same time, keep this thing making big power at 3,000, 3,500. Because most of the trucks, nobody wants to put anything more than about a 2,500 stall in them.
Yeah, and I would say, like, there's a guy I saw here where he says, at what power level do you want to do pistons and rods, or do rods first? Or I'm assuming he means, like, what scope do you want to develop this change in? And I would say I don't really have a good answer. What I can say is you guys do develop very cost-effective product. So if you're the kind of guy that has bad luck with stuff, you should probably buy the good stuff. If you're the kind of guy that can put something together correctly, or you expect longevity, you should probably buy good stuff. If you have spare time on your hands to egg a motor or two, build some cheap stuff and try it on your own. So there's those things where you should be. I always say, like, I hate to be everybody's dad, but I guess people just need to hear it sometimes. Like, look at your situation and do what works for you. It's hard to explain that. So, like, my buddy Brett with the 3rd gen, I always like to come back to him because he did such a good job of, he took, like, even you could argue that my buddy Mark that went 760s with his 1st gen Camaro. I mean, it's a 427 LSX with square ports, and it has twin billet 85 millimeter turbos on it. It takes a lot of ties from sloppy, and people might scoff at that, but it has twin Chinese air-to-air intercoolers. Who do you know has a 3,500-pound street car on a 275 radial with a 427 twin turbo that he can drive? He did drag week twice in it and averaged a high 7. Who has a plastic intake manifold? Who has a completely stock LS3 intake, and who has an air-to-air intercooler? Everybody has a refrigerator up front that they have to feed $70 in ice in between passes.
Right.
So he compromised. He took a lot of functionality and ease of use, and every now and then, I haven't been to the track with him much, but people would go. He'd make a pass. People would run over and look for the 7-second 1st gen Camaro, and they'd look in his engine bay and be like, "It's not this car."
Right.
Definitely not this car. It doesn't have a gigantic intake. It doesn't have all of this stuff. It has a stock rad support. I don't understand. It's not this one. So, like, it's tough to say to him. And then, like, my buddy Brett, I would say he took all the best stuff, and then he took his knowledge, and what made him comfortable was he didn't want to be working on the car all the time.
Bingo.
So he upgraded certain things. He did use a stock rod, but he bought your piston because it goes on a stock rod. And then what I didn't realize either was he raised his compression to a very desirable level very easily. And then your piston is forged, so it can take a little bit of abuse, and he doesn't have to worry about it. Meanwhile, a stock one will turn to dust.
Right. You brought up something great. So a lot of it is what stage are you in life?
Yep.
A lot of it is how much is your time worth to you? When I was younger, I could just go out there and work in the garage until 2 a.m. and everything like that, and wake up just peachy fine at 7 o'clock and get to work, and I could do that. Once you get a family, start getting married, and swapping stuff out, is something that you try to avoid. Every
On that transition.
Right. Yeah. That happens for everybody in life. You've got a son now and you want to spend time with him. You're playing Legos with him here this morning, which is very cool. And that's taking some time out of the garage for you. So that's just a natural progression.
I get it now. So that's why I used to harp on people and be like, just take your time and spend your time. And I'm like, well, so a lot of times you don't have that time. So yeah, that's why you said it. And I just said it like, think about what you have to do and see if it's worthwhile for you.
Cool.
Well, yeah, we're just over an hour of your time right now, and we appreciate it, Matt. We appreciate you being here and taking the time to talk with us, and we look forward to working with you more down the road. And Brian, anything else?
Well, I guess one last thing is we did kind of a little bit of an interesting event there with your latest engine. So we sent you crank rods, pistons, and maybe a camshaft for that aluminum block thing. And the funny thing about that is we did it very unconventionally, where we actually put a stroker crank in it, a 4-inch stroker crank, which is something that you don't need cubic inch 5.3. And the reason why we did that was specifically to make all the power that we could, say sub 7,000 RPM, so that allowed you to keep your valve train with, factory rockers with maybe a training kit or something like that. But, adding those cubes with that stroker is pretty unique. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I thought, when you guys reached out, because people, obviously there was a big shortage on Elgin stuff because it's overused, and then everyone's buying, it's similar to people buying oversized injector. People are buying like a certain cam for whatever reason. And you guys were like, it'd be cool to work with you on something, Matt, for you to test this stuff. And I'm like, that would be awesome. It would be cool to do that. And then you were like, well, I'm like, it would be neat to try pistons and rods and just put them in on a weekend and see how they do. And then I got that engine and a couple of the bores were kind of shot and everything else. And I'm like, well, this is, it'll snowball, but that's cool because you guys are going to send the parts. So right. It might be something where I have
the next oversize.
Yeah. I'm like, I might have backed out on that on my own, but since you guys were there, and I'm like, what would be neat, I don't really see a lot of people doing, is maintaining the smaller bore, because it seems like people lift the heads off these engines before they really hurt them. It'd be neat to see if just making the smaller bore produces a better result. And then you were like, yeah, it'd be neat to increase the stroke, would give us more cubes and everything else, and still maintain the packaging and produce maybe a more desirable power band for a street car, more broad, low RPM power.
Yeah, allows you to run a bigger turbo, so there's more power there. It spools, quicker than it ever would have, as a 5.3. So anyway, I want to say, thank you for helping us test with that stuff, thinking outside the box with that. And with that, again, we'll just keep on working with you. Thank you for your time so much here today. For all of you commenters out there, you've sent us a ton of great stuff, and there's more stories to tell here. We're going to try to get into the comments and try to make some more, give you answers. Matt and I both, talked about that before the show here today, is that we try to get in there and, individualize some of our answers. But, thank you.
Yeah, I'll go through, and if people think we missed stuff, I'd like to go through and just, answer some stuff for people also. So.
Okay. Well, once again, Matt Happel from Sloppy Mechanics, thank you for joining us today. Dave, thank you for entertaining us as well.
Absolutely. And again, everybody have a great weekend, and we'll talk next time.
All right. Thanks.